I would like you to welcome our very esteemed guest today, Dr. LaPier. Um, I have to say this much too. She is Iku, our staff person here at NABS. She's her mother. That's the most important role that she has on a daily basis is as being a mother and grandmother. But she is Dr. Rosalyn Rae LaPier is an award-winning Indigenous writer, environmental historian, and history professor. She is a traditionally trained ethnobotanist, traditionally trained ethnobotanist. She learned ethnobotany and traditional ecological knowledge by apprenticing with her maternal grandmother, Annie Mad Plume Wall, and her aunt, Theresa Still Smoking, for more than 20 years. Major knowledge acquired there. Oh my gosh. Dr. LaPier is an enrolled member of the Blackfeet tribe of Montana and Métis. I'm so excited. And I'm just going to say this. Dr. LaPier was here before the young lady who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. And we love her writing. We love what she's done. But let's give some kudos and learn from those who laid that foundation for those who are coming up in it today. So Dr. LaPier, I'm so excited you're with us today. I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you, Sandy, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day, and especially if this is your lunch hour, to join us today. I'm going to share with you a slide presentation that you can watch while you're listening to me talk as well. Today, we are going to focus on traditional medicines that you can use for your healing journey. And what we are interested in addressing, of course, with your healing journey is those of us who are returning from the legacy of cultural genocide and cultural genocide. So I want to begin with an introduction. I'm sorry. I want to begin by sharing what I will be talking with you today. So I'm going to begin by telling you, how did I learn about plants, which Sandy already introduced some of that, but I'll share a little bit more. I do want to mention what is cultural genocide. There is a definition, international definition that we use so that people can understand what that terminology is. I also like to share a quote that will center us as we are thinking about why we should be relearning about traditional plants and traditional knowledge. And then I'm going to share 8 plants that I think that people can use today and that are important for our healing in contemporary life. So I want to begin by talking about where did I learn my knowledge that I have today. And as was mentioned, I apprenticed with my grandmother and I apprenticed with my oldest aunt to learn about plants. Even though I came from a family that is very knowledgeable about Blackfeet native plant use, it wasn't until I was in my 20s, until after I had graduated from college, when I returned home and my oldest aunt said, hey, we want you to be the one that learns about plants and to continue this knowledge. And so I began apprenticing with my grandmother and my oldest aunt to learn about plants. The photographs that you see here on this slide to the far right is myself and my grandmother, probably about 20 years ago. It was a while ago. My grandmother did live to be 97 years old, so they lived for a very long time. The middle photograph is a photograph of my grandmother and my grandfather, who are both Blackfeet. What I love about this particular photograph is you see in my grandmother's hand plant. She was always had plants around her and with her. And if you ever went to her house, her shed, she actually had two sheds on both sides of her house, were always filled with plants that she used for medicine. And to the far left, this photograph is a picture of my grandmother and her grandmother. She was raised by two grandmothers. She was raised by her grandmother and great-grandmother because her mother had passed away during childbirth, which was a very common thing that happened back in the day. And so what I like about this particular slide is I'm trying to share and show people, within my own family, there are 7 generations of knowledge that we have passed down through the generations and that we continue to pass down through the generations. So now my children, who are both adults, but my children are now also learning about plant knowledge from myself and from members of our family. So next I want to share about, what is cultural genocide? And again, there is a international definition. So I'm going to read that definition. Cultural genocide is the systemic destruction of traditions, values, language, and other elements that make one group of people distinct from another. Cultural genocide is a term that has been used both in the United States and Canada to describe public policies that were part of our governmental systems that included, the elimination of Indigenous languages, religion, cultural practices, but also parenting and family relationships. And oftentimes those policies were both within community and outside of community. And of course, we realize that they also occurred within our residential and boarding school system. One of the things that we wanted to address today was how do you heal? How do communities, how do individuals heal from cultural genocide? Both kind of the being somebody who was directly impacted with cultural genocide, but also kind of the legacy of cultural genocide that we see within our communities. So one of the ways that this happens is inside the community and by individuals themselves. So people who are working to revitalize our traditional ways, our traditional knowledge, people working to revitalize languages and cultural practices, but then also our relationships within our families and in our communities. One of the things that I always want to recognize is that because it was on the public policy level that cultural genocide occurred both within the United States and Canada, that really it's at the public policy level that we also need to address it. And so I think that we need to continue to support organizations like the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition and others, who are working to change public policy around these practices that sometimes are continuing still within our school systems and our in our communities. And I'll just give one example. So for example, many of our states in the United States are English-only states where we have English as the official language of a state. And I think that that is the kind of public policy that we can change to make sure that we are recognizing Indigenous languages and celebrating them and kind of returning them to that place within our communities and our families. So as I mentioned, I always like sharing a quote to sort of center our learning, and in this case, centering our workshop that we're having here with this webinar. So this is a quote, I will read it for you. This is a quote from Christy Belcourt. Christy Belcourt is a Métis artist from Canada. They wrote an excellent book on ethnobotany called Medicine to Help Us, Traditional Métis Plant Use. Unfortunately, you can only buy it in Canada, but whenever you're in Canada, please pick up a copy of Christy Belcourt's book. I think you can also order it, of course, online. So her quote is, all plants must be treated with respect. Since individual plants are living beings with spirits, anyone picking medicines must first offer tobacco, then thank the plant and tell it what it will be used for before picking it. In essence, the plant is giving up its life in order to help us prolong our lives. It sacrifices itself for us, and as such, we in turn must give something in return. I like sharing that quote because I think it really emphasizes our relationships that we want to reestablish with the natural world and with our land and landscape. I am often asked the question when I give these kinds of workshops with people about kind of reestablishing our relationship with the land, reestablishing our relationship with the natural world, and in particular, reestablishing our relationship with plants. And I'm often asked questions about proper respect and prayer with the natural world. And I think that if you are at that point in your journey, your healing journey, that you are reestablishing these relationships, that you're learning that this is a great kind of you can add this quote to your daily practice. You can add it as a quote. You can sort of add it as a prayer that you can start utilizing. And then as you learn more, you can add to that. But I think this is a really good quote to begin with. So next I want to share about why we should be learning about native plants. I guess everybody is here today at this webinar because they're interested in native plants, but I always want to sort of remind us, why it really is important to our, not just native communities, but kind of the world in general, of why it's important for us to learn about the world that we live in and about native plants. So again, when we think about recovering from and healing from the legacy of cultural genocide, or for those people who experienced it themselves, cultural genocide, especially within boarding schools, I think that when we relearn the traditional knowledges that these policies attempted to erase, really learning about these things is an act of resistance. And it helps us reestablish those relationships. I really like these sort of R words, like resistance. And I think that this is something that, again, when you start thinking about how to reestablish these types of practices into your daily life, one of the ways that you can do this is by using all of these great R words, right? That what you're trying to do is revitalize, reinvigorate, right? Re-energize, restore, renew, regenerate, revive, rejuvenate, refresh, reawaken, rekindle. So we can kind of go on and on, but all of it is to kind of breathe new life into our traditional knowledge, into our Indigenous knowledge, and also recreate a relationship with the natural world, with our land and landscape. And again, if you are at the point in this journey where you're just beginning to learn about these practices, I think that when you start thinking again about daily practices that include, again, prayer or quotes, I think using kind of all of these R words to say, what am I doing? These are great things to recite on a daily practice. I want to also share about where should you be learning about plants. And so I think of this kind of as a target approach. So I feel like you should go first to your family, right? Go first to your mother, your grandmothers, go to your community first. But I recognize that because of this legacy of cultural genocide within our communities, that oftentimes that might not be the place to go because people have, there has been a severing of community knowledge. The next place to go to, I think, are workshops like this. So attending public workshops or webinars, especially where there are people who are knowledgeable, who have learned in a traditional way about plants and Indigenous knowledge. That's another place to go to. I think there's also a lot of great books now that have been written by Indigenous authors about ethnobotany, food systems, Indigenous knowledge, and there are great, independent Indigenous-owned bookstores like Birch Bark Books there in Minnesota, where you can go to and order and buy books to read. The other place that you can go to is in your local communities. Oftentimes there are parks and local gardens, and sometimes even like farmers markets where people are growing and selling native plants that you can learn about native plants there as well. So I think that, again, start in your own community with your own family, but then sort of go out further and further into the community to learn about this information. One of the things I would like to emphasize today is you can also grow your own native plants. And so as I'm sharing and providing a couple of examples of native plants that you can use for health and healing, I tried to select some plants that you can definitely grow in your own home, indoors and or outdoors, but start thinking about using growing plants as part of your healing process and part of your learning journey. So one of the things I want to share, and first of all, this might seem very simplistic, like kind of everybody knows this, but not necessarily. So what are some of the basic tools you need to grow plants in your own home? So one, of course, is seeds and or plants. There are some really great places that now where you can get native plant seeds, nonprofit organizations, seed saving organizations, native owned ones, that you can find seeds that will that you can grow in your own home. Containers, you can get them pretty much anywhere, literally any kind of rummage sale or thrift store, you're going to find containers that you can use for indoors or outdoors. You're going to need potting soil. You're going to need some really good, clean soil and earth. You'll also need water and sun. So it's pretty simple to grow your own plants. And I really strongly encourage people as they're beginning to learn about native plant knowledge to just jump right in there and start doing it yourself. This is a good time of year to begin thinking about that because we're still in the winter months, but spring is coming. So this might be the year to don't go crazy and try to grow a bunch of plants, but just pick out a couple of things that you think are important for you to learn and start with those. So now I want to share 8 different plants that are both good for health and healing, but also good for growing. And so I tried to pick, and there's a lot of others. Let me begin by saying that. I know a lot of probably a couple of hundred different plants. And so whenever I'm asked to give a talk and I want to narrow it down to 8 plants, it's really hard for me to do that because I can kind of say, well, there's this one and that one and this one. But I tried to select ones that we could easily find, one at your, again, kind of a local seed supplier that you can should be able to easily grow in your own home, and that are just really great plants for health and healing for a lot of different ways. So I'm going to share that with you. So the 8 that I want to talk about today are wild mint, bee balm. These are their common names: bee balm, yarrow, onions or chives, rose and rose hips, alum root, which is not a common one, but I'll share more about it in a little bit, Echinacea, and then yucca. And I tried to, again, select stuff that is common, that can be found in a lot of different maybe ecosystems across the US, that you can grow indoors and or outdoors. So mint is a really easy one. This is a plant that you can definitely grow indoors. You can also grow it outdoors. It does usually come from a very wet environment. So if you're growing it outdoors, it probably needs a little bit more water, but it will really take off. And if you're growing it indoors inside of a pot, it will do really well as well. Mint, I'll just say this, some of these plants, I selected them for a couple of different reasons. One, because they are medicinal, you can use them every day, and they do a lot of different, in terms of medicinal purposes, they usually share several different purposes. But the other thing that I wanted to impress upon people, and again, why I selected all of these plants, is because if you grow them in your own home, you will get kind of the full benefit of having this particular plant in your house or near your house. Mint smells so amazing. And if you're growing a pot of mint or you have it outdoors, it has just such great aroma. So not just being used kind of for the medicinal value that it has, but also for that kind of aroma, what people call today like aromatherapy, but for the aroma of having mint in your household and kind of in your life. So it's a beautiful plant to learn to get to know and sort of watch it as it's throughout kind of its life cycle, from being small all the way to a full grown plant. And of course, we all know mint is you can buy it also in the store. Most people know it as a tea, but you can also buy it as capsules or as kind of a tincture or an oil. Most people use it for digestive issues, but you can really kind of use it for anything. I think of it primarily as something that you can use as an anti-stress device, because it's something that you can sit down, have a nice hot cup of tea, and sort of just take a moment to be mindful and sort of meditate. And I think that that's one of the best uses of mint. Kind of in the same family is bee balm. Bee balm is a plant similar to mint that you can grow indoors or outdoors. And similar to mint, it is something that it has kind of that multifunction in that it's a beautiful plant. It has beautiful flowers that you can enjoy. It has an amazing aroma. And so as it's growing throughout kind of, again, its life cycle, you can enjoy it as a plant, but you can also then enjoy it for its medicinal uses. Bee balm, though, is different than mint in the sense that you can't really buy it in a grocery store. Mint you can pretty much get anywhere, including the dollar store as a tea. Bee balm, not so much. You can get it in specialty stores where you can buy the flowers, or you can sometimes buy the leaves. This one really, though, is really easy to grow. It's easy to grow indoors, easy to grow outdoors. What you're going to end up harvesting is the entire plant. You're going to dry it. So dry the leaves, dry the flowers, and then you're going to use it later for tea. And this is a great tea for people who, like Sandy, who have a cold or a virus. And then similar to mint, it is also good for your digestion. Now, yarrow is a different kind of plant. It is something that also you can grow it from seed. And then again, similar to sort of the mint and the bee balm, it has beautiful, I think anyway, flowers. And in some places in North America, most people think of yarrow as kind of a weed because it grows everywhere. So it's easy to grow. You can grow it indoors or outdoors. Similar to both mint and bee balm, what you're going to do is grow this plant, just kind of cut it, you're going to dry it, and you're going to use the leaves and the flowers. What is different though is this particular plant really is used as something that you would use for injuries. It is something that stops bleeding or slows down bleeding. So if you actually do have a cut or something like that. But what it is used for mostly within Indigenous communities is as a medicine for women's monthly cycle. It is something that you can turn into a tea and drink it every single month, and it helps with that, having a healthy monthly cycle for women. So now this is a different plant that I don't often include when I'm talking about medicine. I usually include this, of course, when we're talking about food, but onions and chives, because there's lots of different species. They're all the, part of the Alum species or genus, is seen by especially a lot of elder women as kind of like this super medicine, like it's good for all things. And so there are a lot of Indigenous people who love using both fresh onions and dried onions, just as have part of your daily healthy lifestyle. So eating it in your food and or drying it and turning it into a broth and drinking it as a broth. It does have anti-inflammatory properties. It really is good for colds and viruses. But what, again, most kind of elders use this for is just good overall health. This is probably why you hear people always tell you to add onions to stuff, or if you're sick, to include onions in what you're eating or what you're drinking. Onions get included, of course. If you're native, it's included in probably every soup that we've ever had, every stew that we've ever had. And even if you go to the powwow and have an Indian taco, they're going to throw some onions on it. So onions are part of kind of our daily health practice. But I added it in today's talk because super easy to grow. You can grow it indoors. You can grow them outdoors. Whether you're growing onions, whether you're growing chives. And again, when we think about aromas and aromatherapy, onion is amazing. And one, you have to like the smell of onion, but some of us do. I love the smell of onions. That just adds something to your daily health practices that is separate from the ingesting it and eating it or having it as tea, but just also smelling it is really amazing. Another kind of super medicine overall that you hear from elders a lot, of course, is the rose bush and rose hips. What's amazing about the rose plant is you literally can use any part of the rose plant for medicine. You can use the roots, you can use the stems, you can use the leaves, you can use the flowers, and you especially can use the rose hips. So again, this is one of those super medicines. It's good for your overall health. But one of the reasons why Indigenous people often use it was that it boosted your immune system. And of course, we know this now today because, most people use rose hips for the vitamin C content, right? And most vitamin C today is made from the rose plant and from rose hips. This is also, of course, easy to grow in your yards and even indoors. It's an easy to grow plant. If you are going to grow it and use it for medicine, again, what you're going to be doing is you don't have to take the roots if you don't want to, if you want to keep your plant growing, but you can definitely take the leaves, you can take the flowers, and you can take the hips and dry them and then use them again, and then use them as tea, because you can use kind of any part of this particular plant. The next few plants that I'm going to share with you are plants that you really do use the root of this particular plant. So when you are growing it, you're going to eventually dig it up so that you can use the root. So one of those is Echinacea. But what's nice about Echinacea is that it is, again, a beautiful plant, beautiful to look at. It's a pollinator. If you grow it in your, especially if you grow it in your yard, you're going to see all kinds of butterflies and bees and moths and flies, different kinds of, the good kind of flies, around it, who are going to be, make your garden a beautiful space to be in. Then at the end of the growing season, when it starts going dormant, that's when you can dig it up and use the root. So what you would be doing here is, at the end of the season, dig up the entire plant. You are going to clean off the roots, dry it, and then later you can make that root into a tea. Echinacea, of course, is well known as an immune booster. And of course, you can buy this in the grocery store too. You can buy it now, as teas. You can buy it in capsules. It is widely available in most kind of big box stores, but it is something that you can also grow yourself. And sometimes it's nice for you to grow yourself so that you can know what it looks like once you've harvested it. And because this is one of those plants that does get sometimes over harvested out in the wild. Another related plant is alum root. Alum root does get grown as a garden plant. So you can actually go to kind of a big box store that has plants, and you're probably going to find this. People don't use it for medicine. They actually use it in their garden because it's pretty. But in this particular plant, you'd be doing something similar that you would with Echinacea, which is you'd let it grow the entire year. It has beautiful flowers. It's a really pretty plant that will be in your garden. And then at the end of the year, when things are going dormant again, you're going to dig up the entire plant because you want to use the root. Similar to Echinacea, you're going to dig it up, clean it off, and then dry out the roots that then you're going to use later. With alum root, you have two choices. One, you can use it internally as a tea. You can also use it externally on wounds or as an anti-inflammatory. This plant gets used by elders primarily for arthritis. This is an excellent arthritis medication because it's an anti-inflammatory. And if you mix it with an analgesic, it's something that you can utilize in your daily life and daily practice. And I know people who do. Unfortunately, this is not a commonly known plant, so it is not available in stores. Like, you can't just go buy it as a tea or as a capsule or something like that. You really do have to go to a practitioner to get it or grow it yourself. And the last plant I'm going to share with you is yucca. So yucca, similar to the alum root and to the Echinacea, is something where you're going to dig the whole plant up. But there's different parts of the plant that you can use. Different tribes use this for different purposes because it's from the Southwest to central states all the way up to the northern parts of US and Canada. You, of course, can use the flowers of this particular plant. You can eat the flowers, but what most people do use it for, similar to alum root, is as an anti-inflammatory for arthritis. Again, this can be used kind of internally or externally. This one, though, because it is really commonly known, you can buy it in stores as a capsule. And so that's an easy way to, if you want to include yucca into your daily health practices, you can do it also at a store. I think yucca is really a beautiful plant. I have it in my yard at home, and it's something, though, that you can get it out in the wild, but it's something that you can also grow at home. This one's a little more difficult because it's almost like a cactus. It's very spiny, but an excellent plant to include into kind of your daily health practice, but also just really nice to look at. I want to end my talk before we go into sort of comments and questions to share some resources. So there are a lot of great resources out there to learn about plants, as I mentioned before, to learn about plants to learn about ethnobotany, but especially to learn about sort of medicinal plant use. And this is one series of books. There's 6 of them that are part of this medicinal plant series. The first time I saw one of these books actually was at Birch Bark Books, and I bought it. And I buy a lot of books about plants just to check them out and see if I think they're good. Because I give workshops, I always want to share resources with people. And so I try to make sure that I read the book first and vet it to say, yeah, this actually is really good. This particular series I like a lot. So they have Midwest medicinal plants, Pacific Northwest, Mountain States, etc. There's 6 different books in this series. They're very good very good about talking about ethical practices, like how to be a good wildcrafter, how to be a good person who goes out into the land and landscape to harvest. They also then provide a lot of information about harvesting, about processing, and about storing plants to use as medicine. So I think that this is a really good book series. If you're a beginner, if you're just learning these practices, that to share that kind of knowledge. And then again, of course, there's always now out there, especially in Indian communities, a lot of in-person gatherings, workshops, etc. And then, you can also hit up YouTube. There's always videos that teach you about these things, especially like today, me encouraging you to grow your own. If you have never grown plants before, then there's some great videos that help you learn how to do that. I would strongly encourage people to, again, pick up 1 or 2 plants that you think you can grow in your house. Mint, I think, is a great one. Again, onions, that's a great one. But you can pick some of these other plants to grow inside your house in a pot or outside in your yard, and start creating those relationships and reestablishing those relationships with our plant relatives. And one way that you can do that is to actually have them in your home with you or in your yard. Second to that is then to begin to incorporate those plants into your daily life, into your daily health practices, and including them for overall health. But if you have specific concerns, I always include something about arthritis, because arthritis is something that a lot of Indigenous people have, and it's something that was here before contact. So it's been around for a really very long time, and Indigenous people have some great medicines that help address that. So I think I'm going to end now and open it up for questions. And I'm not sure who's going to be monitoring questions, but perhaps you can jump on and share some questions that people have, and I can questions or comments.
I'll try to monitor the questions.
Okay, great.
Well, that was so much great information, and we had asked people to put their comments somewhere. I don't know how all that works, but the 2 things I recall, somebody asked how to keep spiders away from the plants.
Oh, so one of the things I usually do is I just pick up the spiders and move them outside. So one is just relocation.
Thank you. That's what I do too. And ask them not to return. Just say, this isn't what you're not going to find what you need in here. Somebody said cinnamon. Oh yeah, I've heard that, cinnamon. And the other question, somebody said they were allergic to rose hips. Does that mean that they shouldn't use any other part of the plant, like the leaves?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm really not sure. Sometimes the reason why people rose hips, depending on how they are processed, have very, very small, fine fibers that can irritate people. And usually it's those fine fibers that irritate. So oftentimes, if you're using the flower or the leaves, that's not going to be a problem because those fine fibers aren't there. But if there's something else that you're allergic to, then I'm not sure.
Yeah, related to rose hips, how do you navigate the itchy hairs inside the rose hips?
You use a really good filter. So one of the ways to do that is I just use regular coffee filters, just use those V-shaped coffee filters that we have out there, and just make sure that when you're making tea or anything else that you're using a good filter that's going to separate those out.
Thank you, thank you. So somebody says, I have a question about offering tobacco. Can you talk a little bit about, like, if you're in the Southwest, should you offer corn pollen instead? What if you grow your own tobacco? What is the best way to get it? Can you talk just a little bit about this aspect of harvesting? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that, again, I think it's important as you're beginning to sort of relearn these, relearn this knowledge, to go to your family and go to your community first and ask what their protocols are in terms of this kind of harvesting, and kind of plant relationships. Again, though, that is often, you can't often do that because of this disruption that occurred because of cultural genocide. And I just want to add here, as I'm answering this question, I just want to add here, really, people should make sure that, that as they're relearning this stuff, that they don't be embarrassed, right? Don't be embarrassed that you're relearning something that you feel like maybe you should know the answers to this, and don't feel shame. Like, don't feel shame that you don't know this information as you're relearning it. I mean, this is sort of part of this process, this journey of healing from cultural genocide that was inflicted, on our communities. So having had said that, I think different communities have different tribes have different ideas about how to pray and how to make an offering. And so one of the things I would suggest is find out what is the proper protocol for your own community or your own family, and start there. So yes, some places it's going to be tobacco, some places it's going to be corn pollen, some places it might be another plant that you're using as part of that offering. So yeah, so that's not quite answering exactly, but just sort of like find out from your own community.
So somebody on our Zoom, some knowing person, they said the questions are listed somewhere, and of course I couldn't find them till just now. Somebody did ask about thyroid. Any plant particularly good for thyroid?
Contact me separately about particular questions like that.
Oh, good idea. What container is the best to preserve your medicinal dried plants?
So
like roots, etc.
So the best containers are always going to be natural ones. So either glass, so glass jars. Again, you can get any kind of glass jar at your local thrift store, rummage sale, dollar store. So glass jars are great. Paper bags are great to preserve stuff. And then the third one, which was my grandmother's favorite, pillowcases.
Yes, the pillowcases.
Cotton. Things to avoid are plastic. Don't put it in a plastic bin. Don't put it in like a Tupperware. Don't put it in plastic baggies. Avoid anything plastic because you want it to be breathable. So glass, paper, or again, like cotton pillowcases.
Good idea. That. So does alum root also alleviate nerve pain? That's a good question since we have so much neuropathy in our communities.
I'm not sure about that. Let me begin by saying this. I'm not sure about that. It is an anti-inflammatory. It's not an analgesic. But what I mean by that, an analgesic means a painkiller. It's not a painkiller. It is an anti-inflammatory. Anti-inflammatories oftentimes help with pain because it's, shrinking down whatever the, whatever is at issue. That's not often the case, though, with nerves and nerve pain. Nerve pain is very different. So I would argue that with nerve pain, you probably are going to need something that is an analgesic.
So someone also asked, how do they get rid of plant mites?
Oh, So one of the I love these insect questions. So one of the things I'd say is a couple of things. One, start with clean soil, and so always try to have sterile and clean soil when you begin this stuff. And there's a couple of other plants that are helpful that address pests. One is tobacco, because tobacco has nicotine in it. That is a really good anti-pest device. And so oftentimes in the past, Indigenous people often use tobacco in their bedding, in their food, etc., as an anti-pest for anti, what we'd say a pesticide. So that would be my first suggestion. But always just start with everything clean. If everything's clean when you start out, that's a huge
yeah. So here's a good one. Is the yucca plant that you're referring to the same as the potato-like root called yucca that is used as food in many Central and South American countries?
No. So yeah, so those are two different plant species. I know exactly what you're talking about. So no, and what you're talking about, you can grow you can find in the grocery store. No, this is a completely different kind of plant. Yeah.
All right. And remember that you can contact Dr. LaPier directly with some of your questions. I tried to get as many as I could going here. So please forgive me if I've skipped over your question. I feel that you probably feel is exceptionally important, but she's very happy to get back to you and answer your questions. People are asking if this is going to, oh, this is interesting. And then we'll have to stop because we have to do some raffle or something. What is a man's role in the healing journey, or is it different with, of course, it'll be different with different tribes, but speak to the Blackfeet.
So I'll just say I saw that kind of scroll by, and so I know Dennis. Hi, Dennis. And I'll just say this. So the person who asked that question is a really well-known environmentalist and kind of expert in lots of things, including hunting. And I think that there is a really important role for different genders, but men in the healing journey. And I think one of the things that men can do as part of this kind of return, right? This return to our relationship with the natural world is taking people out into the natural world and beginning that reconnection. And whether it is through hunting and hunting practices, fishing and fishing practices, or returning to some of those practices that were historically done by different genders, I think that is really important for us to kind of reestablish those relationships. And as part of that, I think it's also important for Indigenous men to support Indigenous women who are beginning to reestablish and relearn some of these practices as well, to support their learning of Indigenous plants and Indigenous knowledge, and creating sort of a healthy community and healthy family life.
Awesome. Thank you. And somebody had asked if there's an email for you, but I think our people behind the curtain there are providing a way to contact you so that they can ask you directly. And so whoever knows how we're doing the raffle, can you please appear?
Yes, sirree, I can.
Thank you.
Hello, all. I have been running a raffle in the background of this. So we have 9 plant packets, seeds. We've got native bee balm, we have mint, and we have echinacea. And so we have 9 names. I'm going to drop them in the chat. I'm also going to read them out what I need from you, if you are one of the people whose names is listed, is for you to send me your address. I will also put an email at the bottom of the list where you should send me your address. So, first is Kiela Bird, Jacob Davis, Dustina Gill, Amy Nations, Nicole Day, Shauna Yellow Kidney, Stacy Edoagijic, also my apologies if I mispronounce any of these names, Willica Asimont, and Xandra Apple. So these are the names, just drop them in the chat. And we would of course love any updates on how your planting has gone.
Yeah.
And Rosalyn, do you have any closing words, encouragement, etc., that you want to share with folks?
No, I guess my closing words is I'm just encouraging you again. We're now in winter time. It's the time to think about planting and get excited about that. So I think that now is the time to take to learn a little bit about growing your own plants and looking for those places that have these native plant seeds and get going.
Yes. Everyone is just putting in the chat how informative this was and how much they enjoyed hearing you. And I just thank you for being here with us. And I too would like to just encourage you all to enhance your relationship with the natural world. It's quite incredible. If you, just 10 minutes in the natural world will slow your heart rate and regulate your heart rate and lower your blood pressure. And if you sit by water, that enhances all the things. The natural world is exceptionally nurturing. With just us standing in it, sitting by it, is amazing. So as you enter into the world of being a growing and harvesting, it will just make that relationship stronger. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Rosalyn LaPier. I really enjoyed your time, your presentation, and hopefully we'll have you return, because I knew everyone, you were here with us before. I knew everyone was just eating it up. So I'm sure we're going to have you back.
Yes, thank you again for the invite. And I know that you guys recorded this and you recorded the last presentation that I provided. So I know they'll be up on your guys' website somewhere. So I know I would just encourage people to, if you want to, watch it again or share it with your friends and neighbors.
All right. Doksha, okay, everyone. Thank you for coming and being with us. We'll see you again.
And if you want to contact Dr. Rosalyn LaPier, you can go to their website. You can Google the name Dr. Rosalyn LaPier, and there will be a contact button there. And if you're a winner and you didn't catch the email, I will be emailing all the winners to get your addresses. Chimi Gwech, and thank you all for coming.